Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I have with me a very, very special guest who is going to talk about a very important subject. It's called Jeffery Deskovic. How are you?
I'm great, Guy. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. It's lovely to have you on my podcast to talk about the subject, uh, of which we will get to later on. But can you tell me a little bit about yourself and present yourself to the audience?
Yes, I am the founder of the Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice, which has as its mission freeing people who are incarcerated for crimes that they did not commit and pursuing policy changes aimed at preventing that injustice from happening in the first place. We've been able to free 11 wrongfully convicted people. We've helped to pass 3 laws. As part of a bigger coalition called It Could Happen to You, we were able to pass 5 additional laws. We have chapters in New York, Pennsylvania, and California. So 3 different states in the United States, which I'm active in and an advisory board member of that coalition. I have a master's degree. My thesis is written on wrongful conviction causes and reform. And I am an attorney as well. And I arrive at all of that advocacy work with that life mission of freeing innocent people and the policy work and broader justice reform because that happened to me. I spent 16 years in prison from age 17 to 32 for murder and rape, which I did not commit. I was wrongfully convicted despite the DNA not matching me. It was caused by coerced false confession, prosecutorial misconduct, fraud by medical examiner, terrible public defender. I lost 7 appeals. I got turned down for parole. And ultimately, I was exonerated through further DNA testing, which established my innocence and identified the actual perpetrator who was subsequently arrested and convicted of the crime.
Yeah, you have quite a wool, let's say, to weave. Shall we say? If I'm not totally trashing that phrase, but you have a wool to weave. If I don't know, I can't
Yeah.
remember what's the correct phrase, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the subject at hand, and it is your amazing and haunting and frightening story that should be on the minds of a lot of people because it's something that you do not accuse a person of something like this casually or randomly. It's something that the law has to take to consideration, and police work has to be done in a very thorough manner of collecting evidence with no subsequential, let's say, evidence and stuff like this that are presented on the jury date. So I want to, before we get to that, I want to keep the anticipation levels high and talk a little bit about your titular years. How did
Yes.
you?
So I grew up in Peekskill, which was in Westchester County, New York. It was the suburbs. It was apartment complex. I would consider it to be middle class and ethnically diverse. I didn't really think of it that way at the time, but really, in a lot of ways, I kind of lived double life. So in school, the kids were a little bit older than me. I really was not into drinking or partying or organized sports or even chasing girls. I don't, but so I was quiet to myself in school. That made me stand out. I guess you might say I was somewhat on the fringes of the society in the high school. But after school, I was kind of life of the party. I was one of the main 2 boys, and all the people in that complex and surrounding areas. And kind of whatever I suggested would be what we would do. If we're going to go swimming, ride bike, play basketball, play tennis, Monopoly, video games, movies, you name it, we did it. And usually, whatever I would suggest would be what we would do. Came from a single parent household. My father was never involved in my life in any aspect, and and that would later play a role I'll get to that after. And also, before I was a teenager, the career that I fantasized about having when I grew up was actually to be a police officer, which again will play a
Yeah.
role later on in the story.
Yeah. So you had a great, I don't know if we can classify it as great, but maybe all American baseball. A lot of maybe people don't notice. People who listen, maybe they're not they don't come from the American culture, but and neither do I. But I know a little bit about American culture, and that is the 70% along those lines of households are single parents in a lot of states. Yes, in
Yes,
America, in the United States, and it's a normal thing to have a single parent and have to have your dad go out for to buy cigarettes and never come back. Shall we say that's
right.
the old mantra about American life. So so can you tell me where things went a little bit awry? Did you did you get into some kind of trouble where you
Yes.
did
Yeah.
you
Yes, I know. I understand what you're getting at. Yes. So, uh,
I'm
so the year.
slowly trying to build up to the yes.
Yes, I understand. So the year was 1990. It was November of 1990 to be specific. And it was reported that a high school classmate, her name was Angela Correa, immigrant from Colombia, who lived very sheltered life, was never went anywhere unless she was accompanied by her older sister or her parents. And it was announced on the high school PA system that she went missing. And it was in local newspaper and her picture and teen missing. And on November 17th, her body was found naked from waist down. And newspaper had story about that teen found and had a map in the paper. And uh, Murders were very unusual in Peekskill. So this created an atmosphere of fear, rumor, and paranoia. Really, the whole city almost stopped. I mean, parents were driving their kids right to school and picking them up and bringing them straight home. There were town hall meetings regularly held to discuss updates on investigation and to give safety tips. So that was kind of the context. A lot of pressure on the police to solve the crime. At some point, the victim's family went to the
Mm.
state police and asked them to take over the investigation because they didn't feel like the Peekskill police knew what they were doing or were that experienced. State police did not take over the case, but they did contact the Peekskill police. So that kind of ratcheted up the pressure. I got on the police radar through two ways. Firstly, the police interviewed a lot of students from the high school, and some of them told the police that they might want to talk to me because I was quiet and to myself. I guess the underlying thinking is people who are quiet and to themselves commit heinous crimes. I think that's what the theory was. And another thing was I was a sensitive teenager. This was really my first brush with death, and I had emotional reaction. And the police thought that my emotional reaction, considering that I really had no relationship at all with her. I mean, I knew she was in two of my classes as a freshman, one as a sophomore. I knew her name, she knew mine. That was really extent of it. We were not even really on high by basis. So the police took that as some sort of outward sign
Mhm.
of my guilt and feeling sorry.
Yeah, just a little caveat. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just to say, this is called the police profiling, and it's something that is considered highly illegal and not admissible in court in a lot of senses. Yes.
Right. It's definitely not admissible in court. Yeah, I want to, speaking of profiles, they actually got psychological profile from the New York Police Department, which explained, which purported to explain the psychological characteristics of the actual perpetrator. And I had the misfortune of matching that.
Mm,
So you might say it was reinforcing factor.
mm, mhm,
So For about 6 weeks, the police played this cat and mouse game with me. Half the time they would talk to me like I was a suspect, and then when they would push too hard and I would become frightened and I'd want to get away from them, they would switch it up. And Jeff is this junior detective helper theme was what they utilized. And because I was only 16 and because I had wanted to be a cop when I grew up, in the career I fantasized about before as a teenage year, I fell into their trap. Kids won't talk freely around us, but they will around you. Stop in from time to time. They would ask me opinion questions and congratulate me that my opinion was correct. They did everything to make me feel like I'm on the team.
Mm.
And then also they use the good cop, bad cop
Yeah, they
method where,
probably buy you hamburger meals and stuff like this, and
yeah, they would buy
give you,
pizza and
yeah,
give me sodas
yeah.
and talk. Let's buy a pizza and talk about the case. And then also they did this good cop, bad cop routine. And not only were they buying the food items I mentioned, but also this officer was pretending to be my friend. I began to look up to him as a father figure, considering my father was not involved in my life. So eventually, after about 6 weeks of this, they got me to agree to take a lie detector test. They told me that some new information came into the police file and they wanted to share that with me, and that would allow me to be more helpful. But I would have to first take and pass a polygraph, kind of like maybe an intelligence officer has to pass a polygraph before they get cleared for classified information.
Yes.
So the next day, I went to instead of going to the high school, I went to police station for the test. My mother and grandmother thought I was in school, so they did not call around looking for me. They drove me from Peekskill, which is in Westchester County, to the town of Brewster in Putnam County. So it
Mm.
was across county lines, 40 minutes away by car, which meant I couldn't leave anymore. I was totally dependent on the police. I had no attorney present. They didn't give me anything to eat the whole time I was there. They gave me brochure which explained how polygraph worked, but then I didn't get it. It was too big words, but I figured, well, what does it matter? I'm here to help the police. Let's just get on with it.
Mm.
The polygraphist was a Putnam County Sheriff's investigator, but he was dressed like civilian. He never
Mm.
identified himself as a police officer. And
Mm-hmm.
even in transporting me across county lines, they put me in the car by myself with the officer pretending to be my
Mm-hmm.
friend with the other two following. So
Yeah.
from there, they put me in a small room and they gave me countless cups of coffee to get me nervous.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then the polygraphist launched into his third degree tactics. So he raised his voice at me. He invaded my personal space. He kept asking me the same questions over and over again. And each hour passes by, my fear keeps increasing. And as I remember, I was not used to talking to adult males, much less the way that this polygraphist was conducting
Mm-hmm.
himself. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I was 16 years
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
And he kept that up for 6.5 to 7 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Towards the end, he said, "What do you mean you didn't do it? You just told us through the test that you did. We just want you to verbally confirm it." And
Mm-hmm.
when he said that to me, that really shot my fear through the roof. And then the officer, pretending to be my friend, he came in the room and told me that the other officers are going to harm me, but that he's been holding them off, but he can't do
Mm-hmm.
so any longer, that I had to help myself. Then he said, "Look, just tell them what they want to hear. They'll stop what they're doing. You can go home after that. You're not going to be arrested." Being young, naive, frightened, 16 years old, not thinking about the long term, only concerned with my safety in the moment.
Yeah.
I was in fear of my life. The fact that I didn't know where I was and no one else did either loomed very large in my mind. I was overwhelmed emotionally and psychologically. And then on one hand, he's thrown this possibility of harm in the air, and on the other, he's thrown me this false life preserver. So
Mm.
I made up a story based upon the information which he had given me in the course of the interrogation. By the time everything was said and done, I collapsed on the floor into a fetal position, crying uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And obviously, I was arrested. I was charged with a murder and rape.
Hmm. Yeah, that is frightening to hear that those kind of medieval tactics are still being applied and implemented into police investigational work with investigatory, sorry, work, and I don't think such methods have a place in the 21st century, not the least of which in the most progressive Western country, America, the United States, which if nobody knows this, the Israel highly regards the United States as a great ally and a friend to the Jewish people, and the Judaism one thing that Judaism hates in the Ten Commandments is thou shall not lie, and thou shalt not tell false truth, and you shall not have other gods before me. And the God that Judaism worships is the justice, is the truth. That is the true God that Judaism um, worships. And I think it is a horrible, horrible thing that has happened to you. And I want to expand a little bit. I want to continue with the story. So, between the time that you were suspected and were forced under, you were coerced to sign this confession, what is what did you see? What did they tell you? What was there something actually solid, some kind of solid evidence that shook you to your being and say and threw you off course, shall we say, and they were trying to make you feel that you were actually guilty, and your memory was starting to fade a little bit. um, did something like this happen, that you see yourself in the shoes of a murderer all of a sudden?
No, I did not. And just to clarify that, I there was no the interrogation was not videotaped. There was no audio taped, and there was also no signed confession. It
Hmm.
was just the cop's word for it.
Wow.
What you're saying, yeah. What you, and as I'm going to get to after
Yeah.
that allowed the cops when they came to court, they left the threat and false promise
That
out
is
of
outrageous. That is outrageous. Yeah. For people who
yeah.
don't know this. Yes.
So before the trial, the DNA test result came in from the FBI lab, which showed that semen in the victim and around the victim did not match me. But instead of acknowledging they made a mistake, they kept going with the case.
Mm.
So the prosecutor got the medical examiner to commit fraud, to make a story up. So, just for people who don't know when they're listening, when they do autopsy, they're supposed to make written and audio notes when they exhume the body and determine cause of death. So, 6 months after making this report determining cause of death, once the DNA didn't match me, the medical examiner claimed that he remembered that he forgot to document medical evidence that he said showed the victim had been promiscuous. So, in other words, in order to wrongfully convict me, he was willing to trash her reputation. Victim's family was not coming to court, so they had no idea what was being said about her in court. Taking it a step further, the prosecutor mentioned another youth by name that he claimed must have slept with the victim, but he never tried to prove that. So, to make that argument, to do it properly legally, you would think that he would ask this other youth for DNA sample. He would call him as witness to say that he slept with the victim, but he didn't do any of that. He just made unsupported argument to the jury. And my attorney that I had, which was a public defender because I could not afford to
Yeah.
hire a private lawyer, he essentially did not defend me. So he literally never asked a question of this medical examiner. He never explained to the jury the significance of the DNA not matching me. He never used it to challenge the confession, to argue that it was coerced and false. He rarely met with me. One time he told me he didn't care if I was guilty or innocent.
Hmm.
Another time, he another failing of him was that he should have never represented me because of conflict of interest. So the other youth that the prosecutor was falsely saying had slept with the victim
Hmm.
was was represented by that same public defender agency,
Hmm.
and specifically by the
Yeah.
lawyer supposed to be supervising him on my case, and so that
Yeah.
prevented us from
It's
calling him as
also, yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm just trying to, for our audience who are not well versed in legal terms in the legal world, um, it's not uncommon for a public lawyer, for one defender to represent multiple suspects in the same case. It's not uncommon. I know in Israel there are cases of rape, and there is one or two public defenders that defend all the suspects, and you have six or eight of them. So it's not uncommon. Yeah, it's also a bug in the system. Yeah.
So, in terms of the confession, so for context, there is 80% conviction rate in a case that has confession, because the general public, which the jury is made up of, generally don't believe that an innocent person could falsely confess. So, if you're defending that kind of case, you have to answer that confession. You have to explain the confession. You have to try to disprove it, and and bring it all together in your closing argument. But he didn't do that. He didn't do any of it. He would not allow me to testify. He
Mm-hmm.
did not call my alibi. I was actually playing wiffle ball with one of my
Mm-hmm.
friends after school when the crime
Yeah.
happened. So then again, not to go into a lot of legalese, just trying to keep everything simple. But because polygraph results are not reliable, they're not admissible in court. But the judge, despite that, the judge kept allowed the polygraphist several times to keep telling the jury that I failed the polygraph. And lastly, the victim's clothes were put into evidence, including
Mm-hmm.
her bra,
Mm-hmm.
which was important because one of the statements that they coerced out of me, I said that I ripped her bra off.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some bras, the way they're made, you cannot rip them off. And the jury asked to see the bra. And that's when the judge said to us that the clothes, including the bra, had been left in the courtroom over the weekend, and that the janitors apparently thought that it was garbage, so they threw it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, added all up, I was found guilty of murder and rape, which I did not commit. I couldn't believe my ears. That I just missed the word "not," and up until that point in time, I thought that only guilty people were convicted. On day of sentencing, I begged the judge to overturn the verdict because I was innocent, and I referenced the DNA. And he told me on the record, he said, "Maybe you are innocent."
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that if a judge thinks that, the next thing is, well, you have to find a way to overturn conviction, which he could have done by reversing any of the rulings he made against me. But instead, he took easy way out, which was to give me 15 to life sentence, which I was sent to men's maximum security prison to serve because I had been charged as an adult, tried as an adult, and sentenced as an adult.
Yeah, it's something that is not uncommon, and unfortunately, in the United States, to be sentenced as an adult, even if you're a minor in that state. Um, I think just a moment. Let me get back to my original point. Just to say about the bra. Let's say there are metal wirings that are very hard to snap off in one shot. It's I'm not trying to I'm not a physicist or something like this. I'm not I'm not well versed in the materials of bra making. um, but I think my point to my is that this should have been a missed trial from the very
Yes.
beginning. It shouldn't have gone through the. No one should have been no one should have let's say convene in that courtroom because there was no crime. It's a mistrial, and you did not confess to anything because it's not admissible. Nothing is admissible at court. It's not recorded through audio or tape. There is no confession that is recorded. There are no witnesses. In fact, you have an alibi, and there was only circumstantial evidence, and even that wasn't on extant. Let's say even circumstantial evidence did not exist. So it's very infuriating, I guess, in many ways.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if you want to talk about it, but to talk about your time while in prison. If there is something that is important in your stay while you were staying at prison, you were incarcerated in prison, or I don't know how do you call them correctional facilities, but they are prisons, they are jails.
Yes.
They are a kind of a broken punishing system that they are. It's such a broken system, especially in the United States, where there are very, very serious crimes being committed by a small percentage of the population. So, can you speak to your years inside the prison? What was the experience like? Are there kind of occurrences that pop into your mind every now and then that shaped who you are as a person after getting out of prison?
Yeah. There were 3 or 4 stabbings or cuttings in prisons every day. Plenty of violence that did not involve weapons. A lot of gang activity. There's vigilante mentality towards people who are convicted of sex offenses. So I always had that worry on the back of my head.
Yeah.
I was beat up 6 or 7 times by prisoners who thought that I was a rapist.
Mhm.
They had system of maintaining order in prison. If you were found guilty of breaking prison rule, then they would keep you in the cell 23 hours a day. They would send you less food. Sometimes you would be 3 or 4 days old. You could only go to recreation for 1 hour by yourself with maybe pull-up bar in it if you were lucky. You could not go to the store and buy food items, and you could not use the phone. And because I always look, I was 17 years old. I'm not a fighter, okay? I'm not a tough guy, and I lost, okay? I lost almost all the fights, okay? And but because I was attempting to defend myself, then as far as the prison was concerned, I was fighting.
Yeah.
So the food was horrible in general. Sometimes it was burned. Other times it was not fully cooked. A lot of the guards were verbally abusive.
Mhm.
There was some that were professional and did their job, and there was a few that were nice. But those they never nobody not those officers nor their supervisors nobody ever reeled in the ones who were acting unprofessional. Like everybody knew what was
Mhm.
going on, and they all
Yeah.
just turned because it's us against them. My mother came to see me. I had several sets of aunts and uncles, but in the last 5 6 years, I was lucky if I saw my mother once every 6 months. My aunts and uncles that came, several sets of them, they'd come, disappear for 3 years, come, disappear, and repeat like that. So in a lot of ways, now though not literally, though not absolutely, but in many ways, I essentially did the time by myself. My grandmother passed away 6 years into my wrongful conviction, wrongful imprisonment rather. The prison authorities attempted to force me to take and complete the sex offender training program,
Mhm.
which kind of like the AA program requires that you admit guilt, but they
Yeah.
wanted you to guilt to instructor to prisoners in writing, all the details, and I refused to do that, but they tried to pressure me into doing that. And then when I went to the parole board, because I maintained my innocence rather than expressing remorse and taking responsibility, they turned me down for parole, and they ordered me to appear in front of them 2 years later. Now, I knew a lot of prisoners that had the same sentence I had, 15 to life, and they were now on year 25 or 30, just going parole board, being denied, and having that continue. And I thought at that point I was going to die in prison. I did take advantage of the limited educational program, so I got GED. I learned to type. I learned general business, which had to do with using computer in the workforce. I did food service. I learned to paint. I did plumbing. I went to college. I got associate's degree and completed year towards the bachelor's, but then the funding was cut for college education for prisoners. So even that silver lining was taken from me. In terms of how I survived, definitely belief in God. I used to go to law library to learn the law, and that gave sense of comfort. I used to read uh, cases of other people who were exonerated to keep going for inspiration. I played sports like basketball, ping pong, and chess. But when I was playing, I was pretending like to be a professional player, but not like kids. I was more like I needed to get out of the prison for a couple of hours mentally, so I engaged in this delusion. And
Yeah.
another thing is from 1998 to 2006, I read books. I read like three or four nonfiction books a week, and I wrote letters looking for help. So everything I did in prison, I tried to orient it to have some kind of potential benefit for when I regained my freedom, rather than just wasting my time.
Mm.
Last quick couple of things I want to mention, I'll be quick, is there was another wrongfully convicted prisoner there named Frank Sterling. And Frank and I knew each other for 13 and a half years, and we kept each other going morale wise. Once every 6 weeks, we would meet up and we would keep each other going morale. We would brainstorm about the next move. Frank was ultimately exonerated by DNA testing also a couple of years after me. But I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, thoughts of giving up. I thought about suicide as well. So all of those things made the prison very difficult time. And last thing I'll mention, last factor, I put ad in a newspaper in a faraway state because I put a couple in New York, but I got in trouble in the prison for doing that. And so
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, I'm looking for help to try to regain my freedom and have some contact with outside. And they wrote, I got in trouble for soliciting, they said. So I put an ad in California, which was, 3,000 miles from New York. I thought it was pretty safe bet that they're not going to see it there. And
Yeah.
somebody wrote me back that had been a crime victim, and he helped me morale wise the last 2 years. I mean, I was openly asking him in letters, should I quit? Should I give up? Should I just commit suicide? And he always encouraged me. This was a stranger that I didn't know from anywhere.
Yeah.
So it was terrible time in prison. And even though I just told you how I survived, in some ways I still look back at the situation even now and think this is really a miracle that I survived, even with all of those things.
Mhm. So you maintained your sanity in a very courageous way to be able to go on after being accused, after unfortunately losing your your grandmother while being in prison. Um, so how did you find, above all, there is something, there is an X factor, let's say, that there is something that is called hope,
Yes.
and the hope is a fickle thing. It is very slippery, let's shall we say, because you can find it in the most menial things, most ordinary everyday things, but you can find some kind of inspiration. So how did you find a solace, let's say, solace, sorry,
Hmm.
while in prison?
I think all of the factors that I mentioned to you were really the solace just in the totality cumulatively. I'll share that, I lose 7 appeals along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
The court wrote that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt, which doesn't make any sense because, as you mentioned correctly, there was no evidence.
No,
Um, and
no,
they
yes.
they ruled that my statements were all voluntary, and they ruled on that five nothing, and it was all downhill from there. So the re-argument motion was denied in one word, then denied. Then New York Court of Appeals, the highest court in New York, they declined to give me permission to appeal to them. I lose in federal court because the court clerk gave my lawyer wrong information regarding filing procedure. And so being 4 days late
Hmm.
was considered to be more important than my issues. And so I lost because of that.
Hmm.
And then the next three courts, include the Federal Court of Appeals, they upheld that ruling and they denied the re-argument motion. That even one of the judges on that decision was U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, so she upheld that ruling
Hmm.
twice. And then U.S. Supreme Court
Yeah.
declined to give me permission to appeal to them. So with my appeals over, I no longer had lawyer, and the only way back into court when that happens if you can find new evidence that wasn't known before that would have probably resulted in different outcome. So I didn't have any money, so I wrote letters for 4 years asking for someone to take my case for free, like lawyer or
Mhm.
investigator. I wrote letters for 4 years, rarely getting responses. Ultimately, what allowed me to get exonerated is one of the letters that I wrote, which was in care of, which was to a book author in care of the publishing company. Somebody at that company instead sent it to investigator, and when she saw the DNA didn't match me, she immediately believed in my innocence. She never had heard about a case like that. So she ultimately got the Innocence Project to represent me. She suggested I write to them. She lobbied them. She got other respected legal entities to do the same thing. Was very fortunate. Maggie Taylor, who was a lawyer now, she worked there. And when the lawyers did not want to take the case, she kept presenting it. She presented it 3 times before she got them to agree. So getting the representation was the first important thing. Second thing was the district attorney, former Westchester district attorney Janine Pirro, who does
Mhm.
commentary on television. She left office. So her successor let me get the testing that Pirro would not. And thirdly, we got lucky that the actual perpetrator's DNA was in the data bank. So when they took it, that didn't match me and put it in there, it matched him. So on September 20th, 2006, all the charges against me were dismissed on actual, what my conviction was overturned. I went back to court November 2nd, 2006. Everything was dismissed on actual innocence grounds, and actual perpetrator was arrested and convicted of the crime. And again, as I mentioned earlier, his DNA was only in the data bank because left free while I was doing time for his crime, he killed second victim 3.5 years later, who was a school teacher and had 2 children.
Yeah, it is. As much as I'll admit it, because I like to see the true crime and the serial killers and stuff like this, because I'm interested in how the human psyche works, and a lot of people don't want to get into those kinds of areas of existence that the human mind can reach, because no one wants to think excuse me. No one wants to think that a human being is capable of doing such horrendous, heinous acts against his fellow human. Um, so now we've talked about your childhood and your the investigation that you underwent, and afterwards the false imprisonment and your time in jail, and having your appeal rejected, denied 6 times, um,
Seven, yes.
seven, excuse me. Um, so now you're trying to make a change in this system after having gone through the ringer, shall we say.
Yes. Yeah, let me share a little bit about difficulty in reintegrating, and then I'll come to making a difference if it's okay.
Yes, of
So
course.
I was released with nothing. You can seek compensation in most of the states, not all of them. Believe it or not, there are 14 states in the U.S. that do not have compensation. But fortunately for me, New York did have it. But it took me 5 years, and they just released me with nothing, and there was no help in between the point of release and when I got compensated. So, uh, in being released with nothing, I was always passed over for gainful employment because I didn't have job experience and technology was different. I was making money doing speaking engagements and writing articles, weekly columnist, but speaking engagement is not a consistent form of income, and the newspaper only wanted one article. So consequently, I lacked stability of housing. At one point, I was a couple of weeks away from homeless shelter. Technology was different. So cell phone, GPS, internet had not been it did not exist at the time I was originally imprisoned. Neighborhoods didn't look the same. The same people didn't live there, and the culture was different. So cumulatively, it felt like I was in a parallel world, a place that did not belong. I had to overcome the psychological after effects of my experience, PTSD, panic, anxiety, feeling of being frozen in time, feeling of processing things slower speed. There was stigma attached to me. I was in prison wrongfully for 16 years. Yes, but I was there for 16 years. So how much of that rubbed off on you? Is it safe to be alone someplace with you? So when it comes to personal relationships, that has proven and did prove to be obstacles. It was awkward experience when I would spend time with members of my extended family because I knew who they were from when I was young, but they had not come to see me or had minimally come to see me, and I was a different person now, and so were they. So that was another challenge. But on the flip side of it, when I was released, I gave a 2.5 hour off the cuff presentation at the press conference. Everything I could always wanted to say, but could never get anyone to
Yes.
hear me on for 16 years, all came out. And I realized at that moment I could be advocate without necessarily being lawyer. So I began an advocacy career of speaking, writing, doing media interviews, meeting with elected officials. I got scholarship from Mercy College, which also gave me scholarship and let me live on campus. So that was how I avoided homeless shelter. So I finished that year towards the bachelor's. I have master's degree from John Jay College, and I wrote master's thesis on wrongful conviction cause and reform because I felt like the extra credential would assist me in pursuing policy changes.
Yeah.
After about 5 years, I was compensated, and I wanted to be continue the policy work, public education, but also be able to free people. So I used $1.5 million from what I got, and I started Jeffery Deskovic Foundation for Justice. I want to reach back and help people in similar position, kind of like Jewish saying, if you save one person, you save all of humanity.
Entire
So
world, yes.
yes, we were able to free 11 people, and we did help pass 3 laws. And in coalition group that I'm part of, it could happen to you. We were able to pass another 5. At some point, it became not enough for me to sit in the front row of the courtroom. I wanted to sit at the fence table, represent some of the clients, make some of the arguments. So I embarked on going to law school, and I became an attorney. I've represented a few people. I've entered a few of our active cases now. I really have been able to position wrongful conviction and justice reform as about accuracy and justice, not anti-cop or anti-prosecutor. Definitely against cops and prosecutors that engage in misconduct and breaking law and not respecting
Yeah,
constitutional rights. But as
of
to the
course.
legitimate people in their professions, no problem with them. It's not a few bad apples. It's a heck of a lot more than that, or we
Yeah.
wouldn't have 2,805 exonerations documented in National Registry of Exonerations. But it's not everyone either. And I have been able to get buy-in from law enforcement. So for the last 7 years, I have co-taught the ethics class in Police Academy in New Jersey. I served on transition team for the incoming Westchester District Attorney for writing memos for how their conviction review unit should function. I served on Peekskill Police Task Force Reform Group, serving with the police chief and the county police officer, retired detective, and we were able to agree on policy changes aimed at preventing wrongful conviction. I've addressed judges. I did some training sessions for law enforcement in the country of Argentina. So I've gotten buy-in from law enforcement that way. And as individual advocate, not as part of my nonprofit, my endorsement's been sought and given in 11 different political races where wrongful conviction and broader justice reform was part of the policy plank of people running for office, including people running for district attorneys. So I have obtained that respect as as an advocate with a solid body of work. One of the questions I'm asked often is, am I angry? And my answer to that is no, because I want to enjoy my life as much as I can, and I cannot do that if I'm angry or bitter. I feel like I lost so much as it is. I mean, remember, from age 17 to 32, so births, deaths, weddings, holidays, rites of passage. I didn't graduate high school. I didn't go to prom. I didn't finish education at more traditional age. I'm not well on the way to a career. I'm not, don't have family. So the loss is tremendous and incalculable. But why amplify that? Why amplify that by giving rest of my life? And look, if I was to take the low road, it's not like I would be affecting anybody anyway. I would be the only loser in that scenario. So for all those reasons, I'm not angry. I take that energy that I feel and I channel it into the advocacy work. I make sense of what happened to me by my knowing that my purpose in the world is to free wrongfully convicted people, make the system more accurate, and the broader justice reform. And consistent with that, my dream is to one day have a chapter of the Jeffery Deskovic Foundation for Justice in each state in the U.S. and ultimately in every country, because I see wrongful conviction as a worldwide problem, not a U.S. problem in particular. And countries where we do not hear about wrongful conviction, it's not because they're not happening, it's simply because nobody's being exonerated, nobody's working on it. Some countries' justice system is so primitive that there is no way to introduce new evidence to a court.
Yes.
So that's ultimately the dream, and I hope to heighten my profile more. But listen, that seems to be more effective tool for the struggle. My head is right size, my feet are on the ground. I'm only a tool. I'm trying to walk in a way that God would be happy with me in trying to be pleasing to Him. So that's what my life is about. That's my movement.
Yeah, just hearing you speak, I feel that even if you weren't incarcerated, I think that something similar to that, every person has to go through some kind of hardships to that test their
Yes.
their inner soul, that puts them in harm's way, but tries to, the old saying, what doesn't kill you makes you
Makes you stronger.
stronger, makes you a lot more stronger. And it's very it's very true in your case, as I see it. You are, I think, an inspiration to a lot of people, because false imprisonment, it doesn't apply only to murder and rape and things like this and crimes, but also to white collar crimes, which are far more prevalent, shall we say, in the populace. Yes.
So I agree with you completely. And to build off your point, so if someone's listening, I know that there are themes from my life and from my journey, and those are universal. And that is this: my formula for overcoming adversity. Having goal, have a realistic plan,
Yeah.
Be flexible. Remember, the goal's the goal. The plan is not the goal. So if a different door opens for you towards that goal that you did not anticipate, just as long as it's bringing you closer to that goal, continue on. There are no reasons why you can't not do something. There might be reasons why it's more difficult, but there are no reasons why you cannot accomplish. Work really hard and you never give up. When you're ready to give up, say to yourself what I do. Maybe this is the key moment right here. And I was on the verge of a breakthrough, but because I quit, it's not going to happen. So even though I can't continue anymore, I'm going to do it anyway, just to see what happens on the other side. And once you get there and you come out the other side, reach back and help other people in the same position you were in, do some work on the preventative side. If you can do that, then you will make your suffering count for something. It will be healing. It will be cathartic. It will help make the world little bit better. And that applies well beyond incarceration or justice reform. I know that that would apply to, say, somebody homeless or domestic abuse survivor, sexual assault victim, somebody who has debilitating illness, someone who suffered racism, another person who was discriminated against, and anything else you want to apply it to of tremendous magnitude down to the smallest challenge. It's universal. And so I would like people to take that theme from me. And one day, maybe I'll hear about other people doing really meaningful, great things in the world. And I can feel good, that I helped to throw that pebble in the water and it indirectly set somebody else in motion to doing something good in the world.
So let's do a little bit something special, something extra to end it, and talk a little bit about what you mentioned to me before we started the conversation. You wanted to talk a little bit about your connection or your
Yes.
renewed or revealed connections with the Jewish people and the Jewish experience, shall we say. I come from Israel, the so-called the Holy Land, and it is a great magnet, the great magnet of the world, as I view it. A lot of people, everyone who tried to conquer it, failed along the years and through the annals of history. There wasn't one military conqueror that could keep and hold this great, I don't know, how do you, land, this place, it's out of time. It's a land out of time. It's not, it doesn't exist in the physical sense. It exists in the minds and the hearts of people, at least the Jewish people. So, can you speak a little bit about the inspiration that you draw and your affinity to Jewish people and the Jewish community?
Yes, yeah, I am friend to the Jewish community, and my intersection has been firstly, I've been blessed. I've been on the cover of Ami magazine. They really
Mhm.
many pages in color, so that was an honor. I've been able to speak in a variety of Jewish settings. So I've spoke maybe 5 or 6 times at Solomon Schechter schools. I've
Oh, yeah.
spoken in Haskell High School. I have been a guest approximately 4 or 5 times in different Chabad houses.
Yeah.
Uh, so those are some of the intersection points. I've had a few volunteers. One lady named Yenti Halpert was volunteer for my Jeffrey Deskovic Foundation for Justice. So those have been my intersection points, and consistent with that, I have many dream within the dream. I would love to one day visit Israel and go to the Wailing Wall and to just be caught up in that moment of being in a holy place and have my prayers
Yes.
in the paper and put in the
You
wall.
don't you don't
I would
even
love,
understand what is in store for you. Yeah.
right, and I would love to be able to speak in different, Jewish locations. And look, world wrongful conviction, worldwide issue. I would be so humbled if one day to be able to speak on wrongful conviction and justice reform in the Knesset. I mean, just the amount of awareness that could be raised on a worldwide level to the issues of wrongful conviction and broader justice reform. I want to take a brief digression, just in terms of humanity. And when people are incarcerated, the punishment is supposed to be the loss of their freedom. It is not to be mistreated while they're there. I was in court in the lawsuit, and the actual perpetrator was in the room, and he was there as a witness, and my lawyer was proving how the police forced false confession out of me. And his idea was, let's get the actual perpetrator to testify how the crime happened, and that's going to be in contrast to what you said and how the police said it. So it'll be clear. They gave you all these details. They planted that in you. And when it was about lunchtime, and my lawyer, he elbows me and he says to me, they're going to burn him. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he meant that was slang for saying they were not going to feed him anything. And I said, no, that's not, no. And he said, well, what do you care? He killed two people, and he was content to let you suffer in prison for a crime he did. And I said, I don't care. That's why he's in prison. His punishment is his loss of freedom. But, dehumanization is not an option. He's going to eat. Matter of fact, you're going to make sure he eats. And if you don't, I will. And he came back in after the lunch break. That was the first question my lawyer asked him. And he confirmed that he ate. So I felt so good about myself that day. And it really wasn't about him. It was just in retaining humanity and how we cannot lower ourselves. And too many times in prison systems, it is a devaluing of life. It's no respect by the guards. They don't even try to stop and prevent the prisoner on prisoner violence. Medical care is terrible. Elderly people in prison where they're not able to obtain the medical treatment, the prison can't treat it. And this is even when 10, 20, 30, 40 years already have went by from crimes they committed, different people, and going to parole boards and being denied parole, even if someone can demonstrate rehabilitation, such thing as aging out of crime. And these are all people. Yes, when they're guilty, they do something wrong, they should pay 1,000%. But once they have paid their price and they have been rehabilitated, what's the sense you're going to keep somebody 70 years old in prison or 80, and for something they did when they were much younger person? And I saw prisoners, I saw some people dying by that they would put in compassionate release, which is the prison medical officials determine they are terminally ill. And by the time the system makes a decision, they either passed away or they have 1 or 2 days left. So all those things and lack of college education for prisoners, I feel strongly about that. And all those things with the causes of wrongful conviction, outlining them, because those things are inadequately funded public defender and not videotaping interrogations, identification reform, better public defenders. These are things that are across the board and that all lead to wrongful convictions in many countries. And so to be able to get the attention that a Knesset visit would allow and to speak, I mean, that would just be otherworldly. I mean, I would just fall on my knees at that point, and just be caught up in the moment of the holy. But one day maybe it could happen, and would love to be able to do more media interviews with people of Jewish background, shall we say, because I do feel a love and an affinity for the Jewish people. And one of the books that I read that kept me going was Viktor Frankl's book.
Yes. The Search for Meaning. Yeah, The Search for Meaning. Yes. It's a very popular, very well-known book. And everybody who is every snob in academia knows this book, and I'm a chief among them. I'm one of the snobs in academia. I have a bachelor's degree in English literature and art history, and an MA in general history and um, contemporary Jewry, shall we say? Yes.
Mm.
So it was a troublesome and lovely conversation at the same time with you,
Yes,
Jeff. And I think we can discuss more in the future if you want about
I would love to
other
do that. Yes,
other important social issues. And
yes.
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. And I hope that some people that have heard can join me in this mission. And I work 40, 50 hours a week. It's from the heart. I don't get paid anything. So 100% of anything that was raised would go to freeing other people wrongfully convicted. We have 10 active cases now, but we have another seven that are approved but are just waiting. We don't have capacity to move them. And would love to be able to do policy work in more than just three states. So if you're out there, if you're listening, if you're see, that's my biggest challenge is I don't have the network. And so I need third parties who can function as connectors. And I'm very trying, this is who I am, my body of work, here's what we've accomplished, here's where we want to go. So if somebody has some ideas or can help, I would really appreciate that. And that would really, and it's for other people, and it would be a big mitzvah for all the
Yes.
beneficiaries
You
of that.
stole
So thank you.
you stole my words. I tried to tell you when you say that everyone has the right to be fed as a human being, to be nourished properly. And I said, you're doing a great mitzvah, even for a person who has committed egregious crimes against his fellow man and against humanity and the community itself. I think that's a great that is I'm I'm lost for the word exactly, but there is a nice word in English that roughly translates into to being able to be elated from to be above the basic animalistic um, primal uh, instincts that we possess as human beings, and that evolution has not extinct from our DNA all those years ago. And I want to thank you so much, and I'm terribly sorry for what you've been through, and because you're a lovely, wonderful person, very rational, very objective, in my sense, from what I gathered in talking with you.
Mhm.
And I want to thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you for reaching out and thank you for sharing your platform. And we'll
Um,
be in touch in other occasions. Would love to
mm,
take you up on offer and talk other social issues. But thank you for inconvenience also in terms of you. I know it's very late for you where you are, so
oh,
I
it's fine. It's
appreciate that as well.
fine. I just want to thank you for agreeing to appear on my podcast and talk about this very, very important hot hot button topic and issue that people are need to be aware of, because you can simply say it will never happen to me, but you don't know that. Nobody's can be certain 100% sure that it will never happen to them, that they will be coerced to admit things that they were not, um, that are not associated with them and have no connections with them, no connection to them. And you cannot be certain for sure. Life is fickle and flows through time, and there are a lot of things that are going on behind closed doors in the public sector, and you're not aware of that. You have to have the height of hubris to think that you are above accusation and above guilt. And I have to say to people that You are not. I am not. Nobody is above justice. Yes. So I want to
All right,
thank you so much, and thank
sure.
you so much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye bye.